one of my least favorite subjects. One of the things I choose to avoid. Something that is far from my favorite subject, yet God has put it in His Word for a reason. If He put it in there, He wants us to know it and understand it. And it's something practical because it's going to affect every believer, every ministry, every church at some point or another. This is going to happen. Theoretically, we like to think it shouldn't happen, but it does happen. It's probably already happened in your life and in your church life, and if it hasn't, I can assure you, unless the Lord comes very quickly, it certainly is going to happen. What happens when godly men or godly women, what happens when good believers, solid people, doctrinally well-grounded people disagree and disagree sharply? What happens when there's contention between two good men, two good Christians, whatever? Again, we'd like to say things like, oh, we'll just seek the Lord with the spirit of humility. He'll show us who's right and who's wrong. If we only had love, we wouldn't have this discord. If we only did as God said and esteem others better than ourselves, we wouldn't be groping with this problem. We wouldn't be trying to resolve this unfortunate issue. It's so divisive. It's grieving the spirit. It's hurting relationships. It's hurting people who are brethren. It shouldn't happen. If we just had humility and more love, it wouldn't happen. If we just got on our knees and sought the Lord, He would sort it all out. Well, indeed, there are times and circumstances where those kinds of statements are valid and do apply, no doubt. And it's rather nice when they do. But there are other circumstances and the realities of life where it's just, frankly, useless religious rhetoric. It's not going to solve anything. It's not going to solve anything. The problem is going to be there. Now, when it's a fundamental doctrinal issue, or if it is a moral issue, godly believers should be of one accord. Yeah. If it's a fundamental doctrinal issue or a fundamental moral issue, believers can and should be of one accord, in agreement of one mind. But when you're dealing with ministry, when you're dealing with relationships, when you're dealing with body life in a church, it doesn't always work that way. It certainly doesn't work that way all of the time in things like missions and evangelism. With this in view, let's look at an interesting figure in the Scripture. Scholars debate whether he is the same Mark who was, as it were, the secretary of Peter. Most scholars, most evangelical theologians believe in something called Markan priority. They believe that Mark was the first gospel written and that it was probably actually the gospel of Peter dictated to Mark, that Mark was Peter's Greek translator or something of that nature. That is the most common belief, although it cannot be absolutely proven. And there are debates as to whether the John Mark in question was the same Mark. He was known by both names. Again, it's difficult to be 100% sure. In fact, you can't be. But let's see what we know about this person. Look with me, first of all, please, to the book of Acts, chapter 12. verse 12. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. When Peter was, by divine intervention, angelically sprung from prison, he went to the house of John Mark's mother. This guy was around for a long time. He was around practically from the beginning. Look with me to the book of Acts chapter 4, please. And Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles, which translated means son of encouragement, and he owned a tract of land, sold it, and bought the money, and laid it at the apostles' feet. Barnabas' real name was Joseph, and he was a Levite. He was from the tribe of Levi, a priestly family, and he was from Cyprus, originally from Cyprus. Okay. So we have Barnabas, the son of encouragement, and his name is indicative of his character and his ministry. And then we have John Mark, who was right there from a very early point in the history of the church from the book of Acts. Let's go a bit further with this. Look at Colossians chapter 4, verse 10, please. We see something interesting concerning the relationship between Barnabas and John Mark. They were cousins. They were biologically related. They were from the same family. Stop right there. Whenever you have a disagreement and family relations are involved, objectivity can go right out the window. By God's design, blood is always going to be thicker than water. Blood is always going to be thicker than water. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, sends you his greetings, and also Barnabas, cousin of Mark, about whom you received instruction. If he comes to you, welcome him. Barnabas was related in the same family to John Mark and his mother. You're dealing now with family relations. If you have a disagreement that becomes serious in a ministry or in a church or in anything, and families get involved, loyalties and lines of loyalty begin to automatically be drawn. That's just the nature of human psychology and behavior. Objectivity is the first casualty when family are involved. Lawyers are advised not to represent relatives in major litigation. Can't be objective. Unless it's an emergency, physicians are advised not to treat relatives. You can't be objective. Objectivity becomes impaired when there's family relationships. You can't see both sides equitably. You're always going to lean towards, or most people are going to lean towards, family loyalty. I know two mission boards that were utterly destroyed because of nepotism. They had people on the board and people in the mission field from the same family. And if somebody honestly disagreed with something, even legitimately disagreed, it was seen as going against the family. I know two mission organizations that were destroyed because of nepotism. Because of nepotism. That's quite a thing in itself. Well, let's continue looking at this situation. Look with me, please, now to the book of Acts, chapter 13. Verse 5. When they reached Salmis, they began to proclaim the word of God in the synagogue of the Jews. And they also had John as their helper. John Mark joins the mission team. He comes well recommended. He has a letter of endorsement from Peter. This kid's been around a long time. Even though he's young, we can take him on the mission team. This is the first mission team now, as we know mission teams, that the Holy Spirit ever raised up. The Holy Spirit said, set out for me, when they were fasting and praying in Antioch, set apart for me, literally to sanctify, Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas and Saul. Notice initially, Barnabas is named first. Barnabas is, as it were, the senior. Paul, then called Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, is the junior. Now, Paul didn't get along too well early in his own ministry. God used him for a while, but despite his rabbinic background, he wound up being lowered out the window in Damascus. He had to get out of town quick. He disappears to Arabia for probably 8 years, where he had some kind of a incredible communion with Christ. He speaks of this. This is probably the time when he had the experience of being raptured in 2 Corinthians described. It was probably then. But he mysteriously, it's mysterious, he describes the Last Supper as if he were present. He doesn't say, I got this from the apostles. He said, I received from the Lord that which I delivered unto you, that the night in which he was betrayed. It was if he was at the Last Supper himself. He had equal authority with the other apostles. He saw Jesus, and he got his teaching not from the others. He got the teaching directly from Jesus. But despite the fact that he was that, or had become that, when he was first saved, he had a very high caliber education. Even the pagans realized it. Paul, you're great learning. Now notice something in the book of Acts. What we see is this. Where it says the apostles in chapter 4 of Acts, verse 13, were uneducated and untrained men, this means that they were not formally educated by Jewish standards. By Jewish standards. In the ancient world, all the way until New Testament times, literacy, certainly any kind of education, was the reserve of nobility, royalty, military commanders, and pagan priesthoods. With the Jews, not so. The Levites had to make sure every Jew could read the Torah. Every Jew could read the law of God. They had to be literate and numerate to practice their religion. They had to be literate and numerate to practice their religion. While they were uneducated by the standards of the Greek world that Luke was writing Acts to, they were not uneducated by the they were uneducated by the standards of the Jewish world, but they were uneducated, but not uneducated the way the pagan world was. Does that make sense? They were not uneducated the way the pagan world was, bearing in mind Luke was writing to Greeks, okay? Well, let's understand this. You see an upward mobility. Apollos, Barnabas, even Peter in his epistle said, let Paul explain the complicated things. The next generation of leaders was more formally educated than the first generation. The second generation of leaders was more formally educated than the first generation of leaders. Peter says, let Paul explain these things, let Paul explain. Okay. When you see a church where that doesn't happen, where there is not an upward mobility in terms of things like education, there's a problem spiritually. Now, again, people will tell you things like, oh, the apostles were fishermen, they didn't go to Bible college, and God used, that's right. But the next generation did go to Bible college. They were learned men, like Apollos and Paul. They were highly learned men. Jesus never demeans theological education or education. On the contrary, he said when a scribe becomes a disciple, he brings out of the treasury things old and things new. The Sophrim were the scribes were the Sophrim. They were the academic theologians of the day. They were experts in text and copying and preserving text. They were the theologians. Jesus said when somebody who has a formal education in theology gets saved, he has the Holy Spirit, God's going to use him in a way that God is less likely to use other people. Paul, Barnabas, and Apollos being cases in point. Gears have shifted now in the church. It was not the original apostles who set out on the first mission team. The Holy Spirit set out the second generation. And he set out educated men. When the Lord leads somebody to a foreign mission field, into cross-cultural evangelism and church planting and things like this, you don't send amateurs, you send veterans. The Lord does not send amateurs. Churches, mission boards, denominations may send people who are not qualified. God doesn't. Paul had a formal theological education. Barnabas was obviously an educated man, but it took years before he was ready. Now notice, Paul's formal rabbinic education in the rabbinic school of Hillel, that alone did not equip him for the mission field. He had to spend time in the wilderness. On the other hand, after he spent that time in the wilderness, God used him to do things the other apostles were not really equipped to do. Okay? There's nothing wrong with sending your youth team down to Guatemala to build a Sunday school and a summer church project. That's fine. But there are organizations that have no scriptural right to exist, none. There's one organization, and I'm only stating facts, called Youth at the Mission. They have people saved 3 months. Some of them still in Catholicism, praying the rosary, and they're sending them to other countries. They were telling people in Hawaii and where's the Hawaii, where family is, they were telling people in the Pacific, you can call Jesus by the name of Io, the Hawaiian volcano god. Some call him Jesus, some call him Io. That's the name of a demon god. They were throwing human infants into the volcanoes to placate Io, to stop the lava. And that's not... I pray to God that organization folds like a cheap suit and disappears from the face of the earth. You send the best people to the mission field as the Holy Spirit leads and guides. The education wasn't good enough. Yes, Paul knew Latin and Greek, and he knew these things, and he understood Greco-Roman philosophy and so forth. That wasn't good enough. He understood rabbinics. That wasn't good enough. God had to prepare him personally. Yeah. On the other hand, once God did prepare him, when a disciple becomes, a scribe becomes a disciple, he brings out of the treasury things old and things new. We don't know who wrote Hebrews for sure. We just know he was almost certainly associated with Paul. But whoever wrote it was obviously somebody who had a Levitical education. Somebody who had a Levitical education. Some speculate it was Barnabas. We don't really know. We just know the apostles considered it to be canonical. Well, let's go now. This kid has been around a long time. As a young person, he's in the mission field as a helper. Now let's look at verse 13 of Acts 13. Now Paul and his companion put out to sea from Paphos and came to Perga, which is Pergamum, to Pamphylia. And John had left them and returned to Jerusalem. Perga or Pergamum, I've been there many times. Jesus said that's where Satan's throne is. To this day, you can see the foundation stones of the altar of Zeus. Zeus being the Greek corruption of Theos, the word for God, whom the Romans identified with the planet Jupiter. Okay. When in fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah, Babylon was destroyed by the Persians, as Isaiah predicted. The 300 priests, there were 300 priests in the priestly caste of Babylon, literally relocated to Pergamum. They migrated westward, bringing the mystery religions of Babylon with them to Pergamum, okay? And Pergamum became the point of entry of the mystery religions of ancient Babylon into the Greco-Roman world. Jesus said that's where Satan's throne is. And it's historically well documented. That's where the priesthood of Persia literally moved their religious capital from Babylon to Pergamum by the 1st century. They're in an environment of tremendous spiritual pressure. Tremendous spiritual pressure. They did things to early believers there that's unspeakable. They had a bull that was made of brass, and it was an oven. And they put Christians in there and cooked them and baked them and alive. And they're unbelievable, just absolutely satanic. Anyway, this kid, this young man, he washes out and he leaves them. Luke doesn't tell us, it just says that he separated from them, from Paphos, and came to Perga, but John left them and he went back to Jerusalem. That's all it says. We have to keep reading to see what really transpired. Well, the churches begin to grow, and something really happens. The apostles were all from a solidly Judaic culture. They needed people who were diasporic Jews, who knew better Greek probably, who may have known Latin, Paul certainly would have, and who understood the culture and the philosophies and the religions of the Greco-Roman world in order to begin mission to the non-Jewish world. We see this in the book of Galatians, remember, where they shake hands. You go to the Jews, we'll go to the Greeks. Okay. So they needed diasporic Jews who were well-educated people to begin this mission. The original apostles were not equipped for it. Okay. Now what's going to happen? The first mission journey of Paul and Barnabas, or Barnabas and Paul and Saul, was like a dry run. But now something happens. Non-Jews begin to get saved. The largest numbers of non-Jews were Gentile God-fearers. They were monotheistic Gentiles who realized there was one true God, who realized that the Jews worshiped one God, and who were able to read the Septuagint, the Hebrew scriptures in Greek. These were Gentiles who God had been preparing to respond to the gospel way ahead of time. You can see through history, God was setting the stage for the growth of the church before Jesus even came. The Romans had a postal system so you could send epistles. They had incredible roads, some of which still exist. You can still see stretches of the Via Maris in Israel or the Via Appia in Italy. There's a Roman road in Switzerland with an arch bridge that the Romans built over a gorge in Switzerland that you can still drive a small truck over it. And it's still there. This road system, the postal system, the communication system, and they took the trade routes, the coastal sailing routes, they adopted from the Phoenicians. It was perfect for the gospel to spread, to send out mission teams, and to be able to communicate by epistle with letters through a postal system and things like this. God had been setting the stage. Not only that, but now the Hebrew scriptures were in the Greek language because of the Septuagint. There were many things. You also had Pax Romana, a relative political stability, albeit a corrupt one, where the gospel was able to spread because of it. Yeah. Now this was true at various times in history. The British Empire was corrupt in many respects, but there was still Pax Britannica. How missionaries are able to go to places with the gospel that they wouldn't have been able to had Britannia not ruled the waves. Yeah. In the 20th century was Pax Americana, the same thing. There's countries in South America where if you were an evangelist, they'd throw you in jail at the behest of the Roman Catholic Church or Opus Dei or something. But if you were an American, the most they could do was just deport you, you know, if you had an American passport. You know, it's just, there's always been that. Well, in the first century, it was Pax Romana. Pax Romana, and Paul had the right passport. Peter didn't. Paul was a Roman, Peter wasn't. Be careful of people who are too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good. Oh, the Lord called me. The Lord's going to open the door, or I just know it by faith. Well, that may be, but that does not negate practical reality. Paul knew the language. Paul had the right passport. They could just get rid of Peter or John. They couldn't mess with Paul. He was a Roman. It was much harder to get rid of. Exactly. When people say the Lord called them to this or called them to that, don't negate looking at the practical realities of the situation. A lot of this time is just people just being ethereal. They're being mystical, but they think they're being spiritual. Common sense and faith are not mutually exclusive. They're mutually complementary. Common sense and faith are not mutually exclusive. They're mutually complementary. Now, that's not to say that God can't say something or tell us to do something that doesn't seem to make sense at a certain point. But it will make sense. If it's really God, it will make sense. Be careful of people who negate practical reality in the name of spirituality. Be careful of people like that. Never let them get in positions of leadership or on committees or mission committees or things. Don't let people like that. Okay? They are just as flaky on one extreme as people who quench the spirit are on the other. You don't want people who will quench the spirit on one extreme, but neither do you want people who think it's the spirit, but it's just their own ethereal sensitivities. Common sense and faith are not mutually exclusive. They're mutually complementary. Okay. So here's the situation. Non-Jews begin to get saved in significant numbers. Now the issue happens, how can these people possibly believe in a Jewish Messiah, a Jewish gospel, a Jewish way of salvation without converting to Judaism? It becomes a big, big issue. We had the first church council. Now this is a passage of scripture that's important today because we have people who are doing what the Seventh-day Adventists do, trying to live under two covenants, and they're calling it messianic. I'm not saying all of the modern messianic movement is like that, but you've got people putting Gentiles under the law and all kinds of crazy things. I wish to begin with, they read Acts 15 and the book of Galatians. Nonetheless, the Roman Catholic Church for centuries, put the scriptures on the index of banned books. One of the reasons they put the scriptures on the index of banned books was Acts 15. Acts 15 has always been a major problem for the Roman Catholic Church. Let's see why. Verse 13, after these things had stopped, after they stopped speaking, James, that is Jacob, Yaakov, James the apostles, answered saying, brethren, listen to the Pope. Now he says, listen to me. Simeon, who the Catholics say was the Pope, that's Peter, has related how God first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles the people for his name. Now remember, before the ministry of Barnabas and Saul could take place, the story of Cornelius had to take place first. The first non-Jews had to become believers before Paul and Barnabas. Otherwise, it would have fueled something that liberal higher critics say today. Paul began Christianity, not Jesus. There are liberal theologians who say that, and there are rabbis who say that Jesus didn't come to begin a new religion, Paul began Christianity. It would have fueled that kind of thinking, that Paul began Christianity. No, the first non-Jews had to come to faith through Peter, not through Paul. So he begins by linking with the original 12 apostles, and he tells the story. It goes on, verse 19. Therefore, it is the judgment of the Holy See, the papal encyclical, that we do not trouble those who are turning to God. There's no Holy See. The Holy See is in heaven. There's no papal encyclical. If Peter was the first pope, why did Paul write Romans? From Rome. Yeah. And why does James preside instead of Peter, if Peter's the Pope? This was a big problem for the Roman Catholic Church. A big problem. Well, anyway, the magisterium, as it would later be called, settles it. Verse 22, it seems good to the apostles and to the elders with the whole church to choose men from among them to send to Antioch. Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas, Yehuda, Judas called Barnabas and Silas, leading men among the brethren. And they sent it with this letter. The demographic epicenter of the church had shifted north from Jerusalem to Antioch. It would then go from Antioch to Ephesus, and then it would go from Ephesus into Europe. That was the direction. So Paul and Barnabas were sent out from Antioch. That's the biggest church. That's where the most believers are. Send them up to Antioch. That was the place. So, okay. and they make 4 decrees. Basically, some theologians think it derives from the Noahide covenant, what God commanded Noah. Some people think that. No idolatry, obviously. No immorality, obviously. No consumption of blood. Roman Catholic Eucharist is not real blood, but they think it is. Don't drink it. They believe it's transubstantiated. Roman Catholicism teaches that the wine is actually the protoplasmic blood of Jesus Christ under the appearance of it's a vampire religion. I don't say that to offend Catholics. I'm simply pointing out what they believe. And then nothing strangled, which was not simply cruelty to animals. It was that, but it was also Jews had to slaughter animals ritually and in a humane fashion. There was that, but there was also the pagan connotation that went with it. I've been to places in Asia where they strangle the animals slowly to kill them because they think it makes the meat taste better and things like that, and then they bleed it out. I mean, Jews wouldn't allow that. So there were certain things they couldn't do. Basically, these 4. Well, it goes on. Verse 35. Silas remains, but Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch preaching, and many others also, the word of the Lord. The church is still growing in Antioch, even though it was already a missionary sending place in its own right. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us return and visit the brethren in every city in which we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are." Church planters have an ongoing relationship with the churches they planted. And Barnabas was desirous of taking John, called Mark, along with them also, his cousin. But Paul kept insisting that they should not take him along, who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, which was, of course, where Barnabas and the family were originally from. Certainly Barnabas was. And Paul chose Silas and departed, being committed by the brethren to the grace of the Lord. And he was traveling through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Any further source of information we have about Barnabas and his ministry comes to us from church history, from Eusebius. It now follows Paul. Now notice something. It begins with Acts 13, Barnabas and Saul. But after some days, it is Paul and Barnabas. Paul gets his name changed. Paul and Barnabas. Now Paul is no longer playing second fiddle to Barnabas. A tension comes in the dynamic of human relationships. This guy used to be your junior. Now he has equal rank. It became difficult for somebody to accept that. That's understandable. Wait a minute. You know, it used to be Barnabas and Saul. Now it's Paul and Barnabas. You want to have the final word instead of letting the old man have the final word. Oh. It's just like Jones and Sons, you know, the cobbler, you know. The old man reaches retirement age, and the kid wants to make a decision the old man doesn't approve of it. There comes a point where you have to let go. There comes a point where you have to let go. Yeah. But in the dynamics of human relationships, friction is going to take place. Friction is going to take place when your junior becomes your equal. That is only human. Such friction becomes almost inevitable, even for godly people. You've got to get used to the fact that Jesus said, when a disciple is fully discipled, he becomes, well, if you look at what happened here in light of what Jesus said, Barnabas, you did a pretty good job. You groomed this guy pretty good, now he's your equal. You know? Yeah. You did what you were supposed to do. You did a pretty good job. But a difference of opinion comes in. And it's colored by family relations. That is usually a formula for trouble. Again, had it been a significant doctrinal issue or a moral issue of some description, I have no doubt this wouldn't have happened. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is an honest difference of opinion among honest men. Paul is saying, this guy washed out the last time. We're going back to that territory. Who knows where else God is going to lead us? He couldn't handle it the last time. We don't want to take him again. We need people we can rely on. Barnabas is saying, this, his family are friends with Peter, and he's been around a long time, and we know his mother, and he's a good kid, and he's my sister's, whatever. And I know he has potential. We got to get next to him and encourage him. We got to give him another shot. And Paul is saying, no, you can't do that. He washed out the last one. Who knows what's going to happen? He couldn't handle Pergamum. When things got heavy, he couldn't handle it. Yeah, but I mean, he's never going to be able to handle it if we don't take him under our wing. Now, I'd like to be able to say, oh, we just need humility. Oh, we just need brotherly love. Oh, we just need to get on our knees and seek the Lord, and he'll show us. If there was a doctrinal issue or a moral issue, that would apply. And a ministry issue? Or a relational issue? And a body life issue in the church? That does not always work that way. Let's look, please, to another division before we return to this one. Look with me, please, to the book of Genesis, chapter 13. Verse 6. Abram and Lot, also relatives related to each other, also kinsmen. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, that are like shepherds. We are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, I'll go to the right, or if to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. We do not know where Sodom and Gomorrah were. There are different theories. Some say it was on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea. Others say it was further north up the Dead Sea, north of Masada area. Others say it's under the Dead Sea. Don't know. But what we do know is the following. We know where Zoar is. I've stood on it many times. And you can look out at this vast basin across the Jordan, up the Dead Sea. That's a big piece of turf. We know where Lot escaped to. Okay, we know where he escaped to Zoar. I've stood on it. We know where that is. And we know that the geologists tell us something happened that was not seismic, but it looks volcanic, except they can't find the volcano. You can see the chipped stones and things all over. It's all over there. Nobody knows. Now notice this, it says this was before Sodom and Gomorrah. It was lush and it was well watered. Now it's one of the most barren places on the face of the earth, apart from Ein Gedi. It's completely stark, barren, hostile. Very, very dehydrating. Israeli soldiers carry more weight in water than they do in bullets. And they're always taking salt tablets and things like. I had to do some army training when I was younger in Israel, and we had to carry these huge water tanks on our back and walk a kilometer and run a kilometer, walk a kilometer and run a kilometer, and the sergeants are always yelling, tishtei, tishtei, drink, drink, even if you're not thirsty because of the danger of dehydration. Notice there was a major geophysical change to the environment, okay? That is going to be reversed with the millennial reign of Jesus. Remember in Daniel it says, blessed is the one who perseveres to the end of the 1,345 days. There's going to be major geophysical changes again, where that place is going to blossom. It's going to revert to its Adamic state. We're told there's going to be people fishing in the Dead Sea at En-Gedi. They're going to be able to actually fish in Isaiah 47 and things like this. There's going to be water coming from Jerusalem and things like this. Okay, so we have a Genesis account that some kind of major geophysical change took place because of the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And as a result, it became what it is. But that's going to be reversed in the millennial reign of Jesus. Now that we're back to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm expecting major changes again. Anyway, notice it was not Abraham and Lot who had the conflict. It was their herdsmen. It becomes difficult when you are drawn into somebody else's argument. When divisions and schisms happen in a church or a ministry or a situation, you become drawn into other people's arguments. Now look at Abraham, then Abram, look at his focus. The Canaanite and the Perizzite were in the land. We're brothers. Let's not fight with each other. The Canaanite is here. Bearing in mind the prophetic curse of Noah on Canaan. The Canaanites were depraved people. They practiced human sacrifice of infants. They were into ritual bestiality and all sorts of unspeakable things. Most of the laws that were in the Torah, the moral laws, you shall not do these abominations like the nations I'm going to drive out. If you want to know what the Canaanites were doing, read what God told the Hebrews not to do. You know, you shall not do that, homosexuality being one of them. But other things, burning babies alive, all things are just too terrible to talk about. Abram said to Lot, let's not fight with each other. The Canaanites in the land. That should be our mindset where possible. Where you have a division between two fellowships or two ministries. Look, we're brothers. I'll esteem you better than me. You pick one, I'll pick the other. Let's not fight about it. The Canaanites in the land. But Acts 13 and Acts 15 are not like that. Doesn't work. You can't settle it the way Abram and Lot did. Should we bring this guy or shouldn't we? Paul is saying, no, don't bring him. He washed out the last time. We can't trust this kid. His cousin Barnabas is saying, I'm telling you, this guy has potential. We got to bring him along. We got to groom this guy. He'll come along eventually. Trust me. Well, who was right and who was wrong? Who was right and who was wrong? Look with me, please, to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Verse 18. But as God is faithful, our word to you is not yes and no. It's not yes and no. But sometimes God's word is yes and yes. Let's understand this. Same chapter, 2 Corinthians 1, verse 8. Paul writes the following to the Corinthian church. We do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction, which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively, beyond our strength, so we despaired even of life. Paul and Silas and these guys, they didn't despair of the ministry. They despaired of breathing. Paul had been pushed beyond his own limit. It was only the grace of the Lord that established him equipped to survive this. We see everything kept going wrong on that second missionary journey. Everything. Until finally they have a breakthrough and go to Macedonia and then wind up in jail. And then things get really tough. Missiologically, Paul was right. From the point of view of a missionary, Paul was irrefutably 110% right. This guy was not ready. He couldn't have handled this. He washed out the first time. He couldn't handle the dry run. How's he going to deal with this? He couldn't. Paul called it right. However, I wish it was that simple. It's not. Let's look, please, to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. 2 Timothy is a low ebb in Paul's ministry pastorally, where people are abandoning him. People he trusted and gave himself for are knifing him in the back. It was a tough time. Chapter 4, verse 11. Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you. He's useful to me for service. Bring me John Mark. Where's the kid? Get him over. We need him. This was the same guy you said was a loser, washed out. Everybody's abandoned me. Things are really tough. I need people I can rely on. Where's John Mark? Look at Philemon. Verse 24. As do Mark, John Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, Luke, my fellow workers. Yeah, he's on my team. He plays for us. Same guy? The same guy. Was Paul wrong? Well, Barnabas was obviously right. Took this kid to Cyprus and groomed him the way he had previously groomed Paul. Right. Now he's an asset, a major asset, who Paul asked for by name. We need somebody we can rely on when things get tough, and things are really tough now. Send me John Mark. I need a tough guy, somebody who can handle this. Same guy. Missiologically, Paul was right. Pastorally, Barnabas was right. From the point of view of a missionary, Paul called it right. Can't dispute it. From the point of view of a pastor, Barnabas called it right. Paul says, it's not yes and no. It's yes and yes. It's only the Lord who sees the end from the beginning.
Amen.
You can't fault Paul's decision. And you can't fault Barnabas' decision. They were both obviously correct, except they could only see it in retrospect. Now, we can see it because we have it in Scripture. We can see it. But at the time, they couldn't see it, except in retrospect. Retrospective vision is always 20/20. Now, what's important is this. God put this in His Word for a reason. Oh, we just need to be Christ-like. That's true. We just need to esteem one another greater than ourselves. We just need humility. We just need to seek the Lord, and he'll show us how to settle this issue. You think Paul and Barnabas didn't know that? That the apostles were not aware of those truths? But while those things are true and do apply in certain situations, there's other situations where they just don't apply. If it's a fundamental doctrinal issue, okay, it applies. If there's some moral issue, God forbid, okay, it applies. But in ministry and church life and missions and relationships, it just doesn't always work that way. In other words, why did the Holy Spirit inspire that this account be included in the canon of Scripture? Because if it could happen to the apostles, it can happen to us. Not only can it happen to us, at some point, it's more than likely to. At some point, it's more than likely to. Now, these were people who saw Jesus personally. These were people who got their doctrine directly from him and who saw the Lord. And it happened to them. Where does that place the rest of us? It was only in retrospect that things were no longer nebulous. It was only in retrospect they could see what God was doing, that God was using that thing for a purpose. John Mark never would have been the asset he was if he didn't go off with Barnabas. He would have washed out. He wouldn't have made it to first base on that second missionary journey. He wouldn't have made it to first base on the second missionary journey. When you read the book of Acts, how difficult it was, he wouldn't have made it to first base. To use an Americanism, wouldn't have made it. He had to go with Barnabas. God used that thing to get this guy groomed that at some future point, not only would he get the first base, he'd get the second base, he'd get the third base. In fact, the guy could hit a grand slam. By Paul's own admission. By Paul's own admission. On the other hand, it's easy for us to say that because it's easy for us to see it. When you're in a situation like this, you can't see it. You can't see it. We're not talking about one goofball and one solid guy disagreeing. We're talking about two solid guys disagreeing. It happens. It happened to the apostles. It happens today. It happens in the best of churches. Notice what happened with Abram and Lot again. When their flocks increased, growth causes as many problems as a lack of growth. Blessing, expansion, causes as many challenges as stagnation or decline. At least if things are stagnated, you know what you got to do. You got to seek the Lord for a new plan, man. You know? But with growth, you're in unprecedented territory. What do we do now? Ask any businessman who's self-made. In the early days, he was struggling to meet the payroll and pay his taxes and all this kind of stuff. And once the thing gets going and the business begins expanding, I'm telling you, success causes as many complications as trying to get a new business off the ground. At least in the early days when you're struggling to make ends meet and cover the payroll, you know what you got to do. When the business grows and you want to expand and go, should we go into this market? Should we develop a new product? I'm telling you, money creates as many problems as it solves, doesn't it? Just talk to people who never had any, and then they get it. Money creates as many problems as it solves. Success causes as many problems as it solves. It's always a challenge when the flock's expanded. When I see a church growing, I say, praise God, now fasten your seatbelt. That's just the way it is. There will be differences of opinion. And it's not always going to be who's right and who's wrong. It may not always be yes and no. It may be yes and yes. What is God saying? The real test of spirituality, the real test of Christ-likeness, the real test is not that these things don't happen. On the contrary, if these things don't eventually happen, you better wonder if something's wrong. Eventually. The real test is not that these things don't happen. The real test is how we handle them when they do. Easier said than done. But we have to remember the Canaanite is in the land. The Canaanite is in the land. And we have to remember that God sees the future. He knows the end from the beginning. When something like this happens, you say, where is the Lord in this? You might not be able to see where is the Lord in this, but he sees. The same guy who was a washout, a misfit, cut him from the team. Now he's a prime player. That's the way it is. These things are not as simple as we like to make them. I wish it was as easy as we just have to esteem each other greater than ourselves and love each other and seek the Lord. Those things are true. But they're not always a formula to work out a problem. You can have situations like this where the best of believers can disagree. Honestly disagree. And if it can happen to Barnabas and Saul, or Paul and Barnabas, it can happen to us. In fact, it will happen to us. At some point in your life, you've encountered something like this if you've been saved any length of time. I don't know any church that's been around any length of time that have not had to deal with things like this. I know of no mission organization, no ministry. I don't know any exceptions. God put this in his word for a reason. I'd like to think shouldn't happen. Remember, unlike its counterfeits, unlike the Bhagavad Gita, or unlike the Book of Mormon, or unlike the Quran, the Bible is not hagiographic. The Judeo-Christian scriptures tell the truth about people and human relationships for what they are. It shows the sin of the patriarchs even into their old age. So they're not hagiographic. They tell the truth about people because those people are just like us. James says Elijah was a man like us. He's like us. It tells the truth about them because it's a way of telling the truth about ourselves. It's only Jesus who's always on the money all the time. Right. Nobody else has ever not missed a shot except him. He's the only one who never missed.
Amen.
Everybody else gets it wrong. Or in a case like this, gets it right. But you can't see that the other guy is also right. That's quite a thing. But that's the way it was. That's the way it is. And until Jesus comes, that's the way it's going to be. When godly men disagree, remember, when godly men disagree, God is doing something. And don't forget, the Canaanite is in the land. God bless and thank you.